we should
Come,
be here.
come along here. Yeah.
Come into the light.
Okay, I was just waiting for the clock to click off. 14:45. Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Goodnough. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Education, and we are part of the Faculty of Education Self-Study Group. I'm a science educator. My areas of research include science ed and teacher education.
So I'm Saiqa Azam, Assistant Professor of Science Education from Faculty of Education and a member of Self-Study Group.
Hi, I'm Sharon Penney, and I am in the special education area in the Faculty of Education, and I'm also in the self-study group.
I'm the same as Sharon, only my name is Kimberly Maich.
Good afternoon. My name is Alireza Moghaddam. I'm an educational technologist in the Faculty of Education, and I'm part of this self-study.
Okay, thank you. So you'll see from the picture that two of our members couldn't be here today. We have right over here on this side, Gabrielle Young, who's also in special education. She's away at the moment. And Christine Arnold, who's sitting next to me. She's on leave at the moment. So we're going to start with a very quick activity for a couple of minutes. So you need to cuddle up to someone. You need an elbow partner. We would like you to talk about either your teaching context or your work context, whatever's appropriate for you. Identify or describe a practice, whether it's classroom or workplace-based, a practice that you engage in that you feel is successful in terms of teaching and learning. Okay, so just very quickly. And then the second part is identify a second practice that you would like to improve or enhance. Or perhaps it's something you'd like to try and you haven't tried it before.
I work these phones to just show them how I use them.
Oh yes, okay. Yeah. Oh, we don't have a date, do we? Oh, okay, that'll work. Okay. Yeah. I'll just be a couple of minutes setting the context, and then you can jump right in. Sorry, I removed you. Sorry.
So looking at the theory, and we had a guest speaker come in that interpreted the theory, the framework, into real-life practices in the workplace. This player, and that brought it to life. Now, in terms of the classroom, what would you like to improve? Well, you're doing online, you're teaching online, more engagement. Like every week, the students have to post a response to the assignment, and you have to respond to others. I find if you come back and...
Can we can't communicate with them, can we, online? Pardon? Okay. Okay. Pardon? Okay. Yeah, okay. So. Well, thank you. I'm only going to give them another 30 seconds. So don't be,
Do you enjoy your presentation? So that's our question.
Pardon?
So we are discussing, do you enjoy a presentation?
like doing presentation.
Presenting? Sort of like if you enjoy and don't enjoy, I'm sort of in the middle.
Do you have 5 minutes beforehand where you think, why did I do this?
Not anymore. I don't. A long time ago, yes, but not now.
Now you're like,
Yeah, it's no big deal now. I don't prepare nearly as much as I used to, right? It's just sort of more. It'll all emerge. Okay, folks, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to get a couple of very quick examples. So the first one, identify, describe one successful practice. Can I ask for a volunteer just to share something quickly with the group? Lots of great conversation. Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing. One other quick example of a success, something you feel really good about in terms of your practice. Yes, thank you.
I use experts a lot just to get an idea of the respective domain, how things would take. We do have the live stream, so we are going to get people to use them more. I use exit cards often, just to get an idea, quick check on how the class went from students' perspective. Usually from the affective domain, but connected to something that we were actually focused on, and my area would have been mathematics. And I found that helpful, makes me revisit what I plan to do the next day.
Gives you more insight into student thinking.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, someone like to share something you'd like to enhance in terms of your classroom or workplace?
We'll tag team. Thanks, Sharon. Mostly I teach online courses and students feel isolation. So I would like to improve more, make it more engaging, more interactive so that they feel less isolated and they can see someone is sitting on the other side of the computer who is responding them quickly and fast, because it's entirely different teaching and learning approach.
And I think that's something as a self-study group we've talked about a fair bit too, and how we increase engagement in online learning.
For myself, as a staff member and a student, one thing that I would like to change, specifically with online learning, is the discussion posts and how we facilitate some of our online learning. So I did courses online in high school here in the province, and then I did courses here in university, which looked very different, and not because it was the whole high school coddling thing. It was because I never had interaction. I had impersonal discussion posts, which felt more of a chore, and I really enjoy discussion in the classroom. So one thing that I've always thought I'd like to see here at Memorial is online courses that are delivered online but are delivered in a lecture style setting. So you'd log in and you'd have the ability to use a microphone to chime in and things like that, which is incorporated in some projects but not in every course that we have in online education.
Okay, thank you. So what you've just done is really the essence of what we've been engaged in as a self-study group. Self-study, specifically when I use that term, it's in the context of teacher education. It started back in the mid-90s with teacher educators, and we are people, we call ourselves teacher educators, we are people who work in faculties of education and look at ourselves, what we do, and why we do it, and how it has an impact on our students. So just a little bit of history. I was a chair in teaching and learning, which was part of the one of the strategies of the previous teaching and learning framework. So I was in that position for 2 years, and one of my projects, it was part of my proposal, was to start a self-study group, which was something I've wanted to do since I started, which I wanted to do since 2004 when I joined the faculty. The chair in teaching and learning was an opportunity to do that. So we met for 2 years. It was a rotating door for the first 2 years. At one point, I can remember having a meeting, and I had over 20 faculty there. People were interested. What is this all about? What does it entail? And it's actually looking at your practice, but it's more than reflection. It's systematic, it's reflection, it's the scholarship of teaching and learning. So you actually conceptualize a study, you plan, the same as any kind of process in terms of research. Same process. But we do it as a community of practice. So at the end of the 2 years, we sort of solidified into this group. Oops, went over, that you see here. And we still have people that come and go and sort of are curious. We leave the invitation open, and we solidified into a group. So our first systematic study involved universal design for learning. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Some of us, we had a broad research question. We had a broad research question to look at, or a couple actually, to look at, you know, how the principles of UDL could be embedded in our practice. What will we do? So Kimberly is going to tell you a little bit about UDL. You may be very familiar with it. We're not sure at this point what your background knowledge is. And then we're going to give you 3 mini case studies from the group, sharing with you how they actually embedded UDL in their practice and what they learned about themselves and their students.
So I'm coming with somewhat of an assumption that most of you probably know a little bit about UDL. So I won't go into a ton of detail on the model because you'll be exploring that a little bit later. But I wanted to mention that one of the most important phrases we use around universal design for learning is that phrase that it is essential for some and beneficial for many, or beneficial for all. So a good example of what we're doing today is using the microphone for the people who are live streaming because they can't hear what we say. So it's essential for them to know what's going on, whereas it can be beneficial for many of us if we have, you know, we don't like to pay attention or we're not great at paying attention, so a louder voice is better, or we have hearing issues, whatever it is can be beneficial for many people. And every time I teach one of our exceptionality courses with our Bachelor of Education students, somebody from the Hearing Society comes in and puts up surround sound systems in the classroom, and right away you can tell that the quality of the sound is so much better that you don't even realize it until he turns them off. And then you realize, wow, that's fantastic. I don't know which way to push, so I magically pushed it the right way. So this is one of the ubiquitous cartoons that's used around universal design for learning. We have someone that's helpfully shoveling the snow off, which is still happening, of course, in May in St. John's. And everybody wants to get into the school, but he's shoveling off the stairs, and this one little guy who is in wheels says, "Can you shovel off the ramp, please?" And he says, "Well, you know, I'll do the ramp after I do all the stairs." And the little boy's thinking to himself, "Well, hey, you know, how about you just shovel off the ramp and we can all go up it? It's going to help all of us." It's a good one. It really kind of gets that idea across. Now, this is the current model of UDL put out by CAST, which stands for something I can't remember. Center for AST. That's right. So
That's okay. They can look it up.
yeah. This is their newest, shiniest model. So we have multiple means of engagement, we have multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. So as you can see, going to the bottom, we're trying to build these learners who are experts. That's content knowledge expert, but also are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal-directed. So all of those great things that are part of student achievement, but are also part of building good citizens, building good character, all of those positive things. So UDL works together with many other areas, which is a very big plus. One of the best examples of UDL I've seen in a physical environment, and architecture is where we report that UDL comes from. I did 1,500 hours of clinical behavioral training at the Brantford, Ontario School for the Blind, Visually Impaired, and Deafblind, which is the only school of its sort still remaining in Canada. It's a 64-acre, I think, residential school. The kids come to school and stay in residence during the week, and they all go home on the weekends, no matter where that is in Ontario. So some of them fly home, some of them bus home, some of them walk home. And I'm sure I've forgotten more than I remember about what that environment was like. So it had, for example, a running track inside, but it was slightly tilted so you knew which lane you were in when you were running around. and it had an indoor swimming pool, but it had a whole sensory wall that was built right into the pool. When you walked around in the halls inside the school, the transition areas where you could go in different hallways had a different sound to it. They had different flooring in it, so you could feel it and hear it. And then along all the walls were vertical bars, not vertical bars, vertical pieces of wood all around, so you could feel when the walls were curving. So it was a pretty fantastic place in terms of universal design. And as I said, there are many more features. And that's only the physical environment. And we're talking about what we're doing in our classroom environments, what we're doing with the curriculum, what we're doing with instruction. All those other pieces add up together. So one of the things in terms of multiple means of engagement is providing choice. That's just one tiny example. Providing choice is often done through choice boards, which actually comes from the autism field, or tic-tac-toe boards, where you can choose an assignment or a way, for example, based on your interest or your needs. When my daughter was young, she was a really, really good writer, and she was terrified and hated public speaking. One day she was brought home by the police because she wouldn't read her essay out loud in class. I thought that was not a good example of universal design for learning. Now, the police brought her home because they were there doing the drug program, and they really wanted her to read her essay, and they made her cry and miss her bus. So they helpfully brought her home, which was not helpful for me as the parent of a grade 4 student, wondering why she's coming out of a police car. So some choice in that would have really helped that situation and prevented that problem area before it happened. Now she's planning to be a professor. It's just she has to do it all the time anyhow. Too bad. In terms of multiple means of representation, offering alternatives like auditory information, visual information, all of those types of different choices we do as instructors. I think probably at this point we all know that's part of good instruction, to speak to people's different strengths and needs and desires. And then we also have multiple means of action and expression. One of those is using assistive technology. So when I taught in the K-12 schools, sometimes we would have different assistive technology software that a few of our students were using, especially in the intermediate levels, though. They really liked it at first, and then they were embarrassed that they used it, or they were embarrassed that they had a laptop. So we used to take the software programs and use them with everybody. So a good example of that is word prediction software. So we had one student who had a really rough time getting anything on paper, but when he used word prediction software, he got really super fast. And of course, the other kids loved that, and they were like, oh, how can I write much faster? And they used it too. So those are just some examples of universal design for learning that can be used. In other words, you're putting all of these features into place with the assumption you're going to have a diverse bunch of learners with a diverse bunch of needs. And then you can further differentiate once you know your students. That's the end of my part. I have my own clicker.
So I'm going to talk about a study that I actually implemented in my classroom. So I'll just give you a little bit of context. Let me move this forward. I was teaching a face-to-face course for graduate students looking at the introduction of individual assessment. So typically it is it's a competency-based course, so students have to become competent in certain types of administration of certain instruments. So I decided to focus my study on student engagement. So prior to implementing this study, I think I did a fair amount of lecturing as opposed to having student engagement. I actually focused on designing activities within the classroom so that I would get at the same content, but it would be, for example, I made up a number of different scenarios. I brought in cases that I had completed previously so that students could engage in cases. The second thing that I did in terms of student engagement was to actually meet with each one of my students on a one-on-one basis. Now I can do that because my class was capped at 20 students. So if you're in an undergraduate class, that might be more difficult to do. So I met with each student on a one-on-one basis so that they could plan their case study, which was a component of the course, and also talked to me about what their interests were. And so based on their interests, then what I could do with them is plan what they were doing for their case study, as opposed to allowing them to go off and decide on their own. Previously, that's the way they would have completed the case study. They may have had consultations, but this was one of the requirements for the course. And actually, this came about as a result of an experience that I'd had in the previous year in an undergraduate course, in which one of my students was not doing exceptionally well in my course, and I invited the student to come to my office to talk to me about ways in which we could facilitate her learning. And she became really upset with me and said that I was targeting and singling her out. So this was, everyone was required to do it. So it wasn't like if you weren't doing well in my class, you came to see me. It was everyone came to see me. In that one-on-one setting, we set goals. What is it that you're interested in? What component of student learning are you interested in? And then we set up sort of like a schedule of what we would do, or what they would do. And for me, this part, the meeting with students one-on-one actually set up a situation in which there was a relationship, which I hadn't had with students prior to setting this student engagement, this part of the self-study project. So the second thing that I did was I used alternate forms of evaluation. So activities were designed to reinforce concepts that they had learned either through their reading or through the content of the lecture that we were, or the content of the class. I eliminated a final exam. And then I used multiple types of evaluations. So, for example, I developed a number of Plicker activities. I don't know if anyone's ever had Plicker, but it's just like I would develop multiple choice questions based on the content of that day or the content of their online discussion posts. And we would do multiple choice. Lots of students really enjoyed that component of it. However, you have to be really careful, know your audience really well. One of the students was really anxious, and she said that the Plicker activities made her extremely anxious in engaging in it, because you have to come up with an answer using a Plicker's card, and she found that coming up with the answer really anxiety provoking for her. So you have to really know your students, but for the most part, most students enjoyed that component. I used Jeopardy. I don't know if anyone's ever used Jeopardy in class. Lots of fun. It would be based in whatever it was we were learning for that day. So it could be Wyatt, which is one of the instruments that I teach, reading for 100 or whatever, and they get to select. And then I used a number of think, pair, share activities. And these things were a component. If they participated, they got the grades, and they were in place of the final exam. So no more final exam, which often creates a level of anxiety for a number of students. That's it for me, unless anyone has any questions. Or are we
No, we'll wait till
okay.
the end.
All right.
Who's next?
Who's
Alireza. Okay.
You're next?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I just saw that it was you.
Oh, sorry. I thought for sure it was
No
Alireza.
problem. So we have a different sequence in the pictures, yes. So I implemented a self-study while engaged in this project in one of my science education courses. And the two questions that Karen asked you earlier, so they were actually our research questions for this research study. So we started thinking what we do good and how we can actually improve it. So when I was reflecting on my teaching, for particularly in my science education courses, so I just found that, I try to provide a lot of relevance and for my pre-service science teachers, and I do that actually through a lesson study project that I have created for them, and so they can actually learn how to, not only how to develop science lessons, but also to improve those lessons through a professional process that has been suggested by the lesson study process. So now the problem was actually that when I put them in groups and they have to work for this big project for a couple of weeks, so I was finding lots of problem in terms of collaborations. So there will be some challenges that I have to see. So I thought that, okay, through this project, I wanted to actually improve their collaborative learning. And second principle that I actually wanted to focus was that I do a lot of different types of assessments, but what I wanted to focus was actually on their mastery-oriented learning. So I wanted to provide more feedback. So how I did actually, so at the beginning of the course, so this was one group project. I also introduced small group projects so we could actually practice some of the collaborative learning. So I actually encouraged them to use online platforms. So we talked about Slack, Google Docs, and a couple of other platforms which were freely available and the students were used to. But they decided to use Google Docs because they thought most of the students in that class, they were quite familiar with that. And so for each project, I just asked them to create a Google Doc, a group doc, and include me in there. So I was actually included in each of the group project while they were working, and they were leaving their questions there instead of, sending me individual emails. So the individual emails were not there, but every night I have to sit there, go to each Google Doc and try to respond to their questions while they were engaged in their project. So this was the process that I engaged in terms of providing mastery learning feedback, and that was actually really helping them to improve the quality of work right there. And so when they came up with their final project, which were actually their curriculum learning posters that they have to present, I think the product was actually quite better than my previous student groups. So secondly, I wanted to actually, for their collaborative learning, so I used actually an online tool, which is Teamwork Skill Inventory. So this was actually created by a couple of professors in the US. So I contacted them. They were very happy to give me space. So they have actually an online setup where you actually set up your classroom, and your student will be able to actually assess their group members in terms of their teamwork skills. So everyone was there in their groups, and at the end of each project, so what I will do, I will ask them to go there and rate your team members. So they were rating their team members, and then they were self-evaluating themselves as team members. So, and then they will be able to see where actually they stand in terms of, their team members. Are they doing good? What type of improvements they need there? So while they were actually engaged in there, I had actually a couple of teamwork, team building skills activities also included in the course. And we were doing that at certain levels. So when they finished those small projects and they were doing work on this lesson study, which is one of the major project in the course. So they were actually working quite professionally, and I was thinking like they are working exactly the way we work together as colleagues, and that was something that I had not seen before in terms of their team working skills. We did talk about lots of, challenges. So for me, the biggest challenge was actually the amount of time that was going in there. That was enormous, and but still it was very rewarding in this sense because I was able to see right away the improvement in the work and the what they were doing. So this was my case study. So I think Alireza will be sharing his project.
So I teach educational technology courses at the Faculty of Education, and one of the courses that I teach is computer and learning resources for primary elementary teachers. So again, the UDL principle that I was focused on, like the other two colleagues, was the multiple means of engagement. my aim was to do a self-study and improve students' engagement and optimize their choice and autonomy. I also wanted to help them improve their self-assessment and reflection skills. So what I did was I researched the area to find out what I could do, and I designed, integrated, and provided more choices. So one of the things that I did in terms of providing more choices was that, thank you, I have two forms I'm going to show you here. This one? Oh, thank you. Thanks. So this is the form I usually give to the students in the beginning of the semester, and I ask them to fill this out and return it to me at the end of the session. That gives me a kind of picture of the preferences that the students have in the class, and then I go through them and try to see, whether they prefer group work, individual, what kind of technology they're familiar with, or whether they have Mac or PC, and so this is the information which helps me kind of design my class activities accordingly. Another form that I usually give to the student each session is this student's activity sheet. It's group-based, so they write their group member's name there, and there is a question on the topic of the session, and they do discussions, and then they write down their ideas there, and they share it with the class. And then there is this part, likes and dislike, where students write their ideas about the class, so what was like and what was dislike. So I collect the students' feedback every session. So they both work as a kind of feedback, and they let me know what students think of the class, and based on that, I try to be more inclusive. So to optimize the choice, I have in my syllabus for this course, I have like 9 or 10 forms of technology that I teach them during the semester, and I give them the choice to so that they would choose 3 of them to submit as their assignments, and also they could choose whether to do their assignments in the form of written text, a voice. A voice file or a video file or any other forms of the assignment that they want to choose among those 9 or 10 forms of technology. Again, in the beginning of the semester, I share my course syllabus with my students, and I ask for their opinion. what kind of technologies they're interested in and what kind of technologies they think that they would be using when they become a teacher. So we negotiate the syllabus. Then we talk about how they are comfortable in terms of presenting their work, as I talked about, whether they want to present it orally, they want to do it as a form of a written assignment, or they just want to record their voice and submit it. So, and the findings show that students thought that the course was engaging because there were different forms of activities. There were different forms of technologies that they could use. There were more choices in terms of what they wanted to do with the assignments. So they thought that all the technologies that we thought were helpful one way or another, and they could choose what they were interested in to present as their homework. So.
What would you say the result?
Hi, sorry to interrupt. I was just curious about what the level or quality of performance was as a result of increasing engagement and the level of choice. Did you see any discernible improvements, changes?
I didn't compare this with any other cases to see how it's improved, but as a result of studying their feedback every week, they present this likes and dislikes, and then I also have their reflections. So as part of the assignments, they do reflections every week, and so in those reflections, they write that they enjoyed it because they had choices. They enjoyed it because they were engaged as the result of group discussions. They were engaged because there were different forms of activities that they had during the class. So based on the analysis of the reflections that they do every session, and based on the result of this form that I have, likes and dislikes on this form, they give me the idea of how the course was and how I could improve it.
So seeing we've started on the questions, thank you, Alireza. Seeing we've started on the questions, we only have about 9 minutes, so please feel free. One thing I just want to emphasize, this was our first cycle. I don't need this. What am I doing? A little bit of security having that in front of you. Our first cycle involved UDL. We're into a second cycle of self-study now. Still with the UDL focus. There are many, 3 broad principles, many guidelines, but now we're also using lesson study as a process. Very common in science and mathematics education, K-12, less common in higher ed. You'll find less research around adopting lesson study, and ours is a modified model. My colleague and I, Saiqa Azam, have just finished co-teaching a section of a course, and that was a self-study for us. So keep in mind, we posed our questions. Our data sources were audio tape meetings. We meet once a week, every Friday afternoon. We audio tape our meetings. We have notes recorded. We go through ethics. We're collecting data from students. We do individual collective reflections. So there's a lot of data that informs what we do in our practice. So just to clarify that, because just in case you're not familiar with self-study. So questions, comments, anything you'd like to share?
I have question just to Sharon. As educator, it's important to understand our students. I'm just wondering, so what elements did you include while determining your students' background knowledge? And did you try to understand their overall background as well?
Sorry, did you say oral background?
No, the overall
background.
Yes.
Yes, that would have been done in a one-on-one setting. So it was just a casual meeting in my office. Students signed up for an appointment time, and I allotted about an hour to an hour and a half for each of the students, and they could come, and we asked questions about, I asked them questions about where their previous experiences. I asked questions around, and it was a conversation. It wasn't like I wasn't collecting data on them, but it was like a conversation around what their background was, whether or not they'd have previous assessment experience, whether or not, what are their areas of interest, what are their hopes after they were finished their program, because the students would have been in the counseling psychology program. What are their interests? Where do they hope to go? And then based on those kinds of things, we talked about the types of case studies that they could potentially become involved in. So one of my students, for example, was interested in concussions. And so when we started to talk about that was his focus. So we decided that he would do his case study on someone who'd sustained a concussion. So, and he was able to access that because he was involved in minor hockey. So it was like a really interesting, but it was more than that. It was more like a relationship building process, because I've never done that before, but it really had a different feel for when I went to class, because usually I'm really anxious about presenting in front of people. But after that experience, I think that there was a different level of relationship. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Thanks. We also had critical friends come to watch us teach. No one's really talked about that yet. So, for example, some of the things that I implemented in my classroom, I had someone else come and watch me do it.
That was another source of data for us to inform our practice. I forgot. Thanks, Sharon, for mentioning that. That was a really important part of the whole process, too, visiting each other's classrooms and giving each other feedback.
Not sure how relevant this is right now, but I am interested in the whole self-study group thing altogether. And I'm wondering if you have to get ethics approval to use student data, or is there an ethics process that you have to go through here at Memorial?
Absolutely, yes. We had to submit an ethics application. Some of us weren't collecting data from our students, having engaged in the first cycle of self-study. I had engaged in self-study prior to the group doing it together. So yes, if you're collecting any data from your students, you have to get approval to do so. And you can't do it during class time either. Now, if it's your assignments, if it's part of the expectations for the course, completing assignments or doing reflections, that's fine, as long as students give you informed consent to do it. And of course, you don't find out until after you submit the grades who has volunteered to be in the study. Right? There were some issues. I had to have some discussions with, I actually was on the university board for 2 years, so I had some experience with this, but it depends. You get a delegated group who are looking at it, and if they're not familiar with your methodology, you may need to call them and talk about it, especially the chair, if they don't quite understand your methodology. So there were some conversations I had to have to help them understand what this entails. Like for me, going into the classroom and telling me that I couldn't tell them that I wanted to engage in a self-study, to me that was unethical, that I couldn't tell my students that I want to learn more about my practice and I want you to support me while I'm supporting you. I felt that was unethical, but they were telling me I couldn't talk to them about that. So that was a conundrum for me. That really, really created some tension for me. Right? We had conversations about this.
And they would give you guidelines, would they? Sorry.
Yeah, there are guidelines,
okay.
But some methodologies, especially involving self-study, action research, there are very gray areas around ethics that have to be negotiated. time. We have 1 minute. One last question. Anyone want the final word? We don't have to have the final word. Anyone want to have the final word? Yes.
And just for the people online, because I wasn't quick enough with the mic, we're elaborating on tic-tac-toe boards.
Hi. So that's just a visual you can make that has different, if you're doing, say, a literature assignment or writing assignment or responding to something, that you can write different learning styles on it, for example, and then match the assignment to that kind of learning style and give your students options rather than everybody have to do an oral presentation or everybody has to do a paper, that you find ways to meet the curriculum that are diverse so the students can choose. Or you might develop them based on different levels if you have students who are on modified programs, for example. Yeah.